Sube el espejo, papá.
Ya llevamos 3 días que no trabajamos, güey.
No va a haber desayuno, comida y cena así. Dan 2 comidas al día.
Faltan 23.
Papá, si tú tienes fe.
¿Y de dónde traigo? ¿De dónde voy a traer? Ahora tenemos que agarrar el bueno. Ahí viene la ambulancia. ¡Cárgate a la derecha, el carro blindado! ¡Déjame pasar! ¡Todo ahí por un familiar tuyo! Vámonos, gracias a Dios. Oye, güey, o sea que no se dejaron cobrar, ¿o qué pedo?
Yo te agradezco mucho. No traigo dinero.
¿Cómo quisiera que un día no saliera ni una puta particular y se den cuenta? Te dije de la diésel desde hace rato.
Todos los policías a mí me están cobrando. Ya nos quedamos sin dinero, ¿eh? Güey, no, ya me tienen hasta la madre.
¡Accidente!
A saltar aquí,
¡Sí le ganamos!
Tengo un paciente que los oficiales no me dejan retirarme al hospital. Tu hijo va a estar bien.
¿Y si yo no se lo pago?
My name is Luke. I am from the US, grew up just outside of New York City and went to school in California, and kind of months after graduating, I decided to move to Mexico City. I was living with a Mexican in college and had just made a film in New York and wanted to kind of continue this study of mega cities. I'm kind of really interested in big cities, and Mexico City seemed like the next place to go. And so I moved down there as a kind of an adventurous person looking for the next movie, and I had an idea in mind, and I was exploring the city, taking portraits of different people in their vehicles. I was filming in elementary school buses and cement trucks, and one of the vehicles that I found just parked right in front of my apartment was this ambulance run by a family. There was an 8-year-old boy, there were 2 brothers and a dad, and they ran a for-profit ambulance in a city where the government has less than 45 public ambulances. So this is, Mexico City proper is about 9 million people, the metropolitan area is almost 24 million, and there's 45 government ambulances. So the majority of transports in a lot of areas are done by these independent businesses that have no connection with government, and they chase each other to accidents and compete for patients. I asked this family if I could ride along with them for a night, and I was introduced to this underground system and kind of immediately knew that this was a movie waiting to be made. So that's how the film starts. It's this moment where Juan, who's this 17-year-old, is talking to his girlfriend Jessica about this accident that he just experienced, where they showed up and there were 4 patients that needed critical care, and he was the only one there capable of helping, and he couldn't do it all. From there, the film really kind of picks up in action, and you watch this family continue to struggle to provide care for people, and also continue to struggle to make a living for themselves. And the ethical and moral situations that they find themselves in start to get more and more complicated as they need to make certain choices in terms of keeping their business financially afloat. So I'll talk a little bit about just how the film was shot I filmed it as a one-person crew. I had 2 cameras. One I mounted on the front of the ambulance, and you kind of get the shot that you just saw of Ochoa popping out, and then I had another camera that I would shoot within the back of the ambulance. And it was kind of this super chaotic setup, but I knew that there was action happening in these 2 spaces at once, and I needed to capture both of them. And these were, quite large professional Sony FS7 cameras, so it took me a couple weeks just to figure out how to juggle all of this equipment and how to figure it out. But what kind of saved the project was that the family had these routines, so that I knew I could try something and it would fail, but I would have the next accident or the next night to do it a little differently and figure it out. So the first 2 or 3 weeks of my footage is just not really quite usable, and then it slowly becomes what the film is. I would usually start shooting with them at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and they would work all the way until sometimes 6, 7, 8 in the morning. And I did that for about 80 to 100 nights over the course of 3 years. And I think when I'm making a movie, the thing that is first and foremost my goal, above the cameras, the sound, financing, the collaborators, is the connection that I am building with the people that I'm filming with. And that is really the heart of any documentary. And I think what kind of separates my sort of filmmaking from journalism or from other forms of storytelling is that it comes from a really long-term connection, friendship, relationship with the participants of the film. And with this, it took all of those nights, and it was over the course of 3 years. And this really strange thing happened where I had been filming, and I would go for a few weeks, and then I would spend some time and look at the footage, and we would edit, and it was kind of this back and forth. And we had been working for about 2.5 years, and we already started submitting the film to festivals, but my producer kind of called me just before we were going to do our final sound mix, and he asked me, he was like, I think the film we've made is good, but is it really the movie that we wanted to make from the beginning? And it was like, oh. And it wasn't. And there was kind of this pit in my stomach that I felt after I really started to think about that. And so we decided to kind of stop the process. And I said, okay, I'm going to go back to Mexico and I'm going to shoot for another 2.5 or 3 weeks and see what happens. And in 3 days in that last shoot, about 70% of what the final movie is came to me. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that happened, but the main one, I think, is that my relationship with this family had finally gotten to a place that was really close and raw, and their business has these really beautiful moments and it has these really dark moments, and I was able to capture that whole spectrum with the closeness and intimacy that I had in the earlier shoots, but wasn't as vibrant and wasn't just right in front of me. So it's kind of the mystery of documentary filmmaking is these miracles that happen and are hard to explain. So I knew from the beginning, almost from the first or second day, that the structure of this movie would be a series of accidents, and in each accident, the kind of ethical question at play would get more and more complicated. You would see a family trying to make a living, and you would see patients trying to get care, and you would see those two forms of survival increasingly contradict with each other. These were two groups of people, neither of whom were getting what they needed in this broken and corrupt system. And the conflict of that would grow and grow and grow to a point at which a decision needs to be made by the family if they choose one or the other, and I'll let you watch the movie to see kind of how that unfolds. But a screenwriting professor of mine once told me that a tragedy is when your main character has two sets of goals, a lesser goal and a kind of more important goal, but the lesser goal ends up winning at the expense of the greater goal. So, yeah, I'll play one more clip.
Agustín Valgari Vasconcelos. ¿Qué hay?
Sota 4. Voy por la izquierda, taxi. Ahí, avánzale, taxi, avánzale.
No tiene médica, dice C4.
Avánzale por carril izquierdo. Por donde quieras, vele, les ganamos porque ellos ya van hasta allá. Ahí avánzale con toda precaución, cárgate a la derecha. Avánzale, corona por la derecha. Puedo ir por un familiar tuyo. Ahí escucha. Ahí voy, cárgate a la derecha, está iluminado, déjame pasar. Burro, súbase.
Mira, ahí avanza, güey.
Aguas.
¡Voy! ¡Ponte guantes!
Ahí vamos bien.
¡Ya me chingaron!
Sí le ganamos.
I knew from the first or second night that this film could be a thriller, and it could be this like roller coaster of an experience that takes the viewer and puts you into this place that you never otherwise would go and experience this kind of velocity of energy and emotions. The whole film is observational. There's no voiceover, there's no music, there's no interviews. And I think what was so special about how the Ochoas worked, it wasn't just these routines, but it was this space where all of the information and all of the things that I needed were happening in real time. And all I needed to do was to be there to capture it. I could slowly put together this puzzle that would bring people into their world. And I think there's a lot of different types of documentaries, and there are some that tell stories that have already happened, and you kind of do that with interviews or archival footage, and you kind of construct something. And then there are stories and documentaries that are filming things as they happen. And with this, I wanted to make like a scene-based film that it could you could watch it and it could feel like a fiction movie, but more importantly than those comparisons, it's putting you in a place and forcing you to experience things as these characters are experiencing them. We finally got the footage that we got in those last 3 days, and I kind of started to sit down to really edit the film, and I kind of talked about that structural backbone of accidents, but it was also a really complicated balance of how these main characters were going to come across to viewers. And I think what I felt when I was in the ambulance was that they were kind of stuck on this ladder of corruption, where they were both victims of a system that was highly dysfunctional, of a police force that was corrupt, but then they were also, their patients were also another form of victims. So it was this kind of big kind of food chain. And I know that I needed to place them in that food chain where viewers would empathize with them as these hardworking, quite desperate people, but also see the complexity of the choices that they need to make. And the film really raises these questions about where personal responsibility fits in these systems where right and wrong is far more complicated than it should be, where kind of the luxury of doing the right thing isn't always something that people have. And there were cuts of the film that kind of didn't quite get there. Cuts that either made them look like they were always doing the right thing and weren't showing audiences the kind of true reality of how complicated the system of ambulances really gets. And then there were cuts that made them look, I think, more culpable than they deserved to be. And it was this tricky balance of moving scenes, adding in certain moments until we felt like viewers were really forced to wrestle with right and wrong, and that they would end the movie feeling as I did when I was in the ambulance, of kind of this uncertainty, but this empathy. So one of the important things that when we started editing is I had a team in Mexico City that kind of helped me get started. I shot the film and I also was the editor on it, but I worked with an editor in Mexico City for a few months at the beginning. And I think when you're the director or the shooter, it's traditionally quite difficult to get the right perspective and the right distance from what you shot to also edit it. You come with this, I guess, baggage, but also what you remember of the moment is often different from what the footage actually says. And so you can kind of create a movie that works for you but doesn't work for anyone else. And so what Paloma, our Mexican editor, did with me is we kind of sat with the footage and she showed me how it was working for her. And over the course of those few months, I was able to kind of distance myself enough from the material to finally come in at the end and edit it myself. So there's so many ways to make a movie, but for me, it was a matter of kind of getting the right people involved to bring me out of my head enough to kind of come back in and do it. And they're this group of kind of charismatic, funny people that are really just trying to make things work. And whether it's putting a meal together or whether it's saving someone's life, they kind of do it all with this same chaotic energy. And I knew that with scenes like this, where they're just trying to figure out what they can kind of make for dinner with the money that they have, that people would be able to lock in with them as the protagonists and kind of begin to see the world from their perspective. And when they started to kind of be in more intense situations, more ethically complicated situations, you would be able to see it from their perspective. Thanks so much.